Healthcare is changing, and Dr. Nancy RN is here for you. The topics are many, but each program stands on its own with 3 key action points for you to learn. Your guide to a healthier you in a changing world. Dr. Nancy RN.
Welcome to Dr. Nancy RN, Healthy World, Healthy Nation, Healthy You. I'm Nancy Valentine, PhD and registered nurse, and this show is dedicated to you, the healthcare consumer. And today we have a topic that you've probably heard something about, and that is distracted driving. This is something that has become more and more well known, as we've heard of particularly young people that have had problems with distracted driving and having accidents or potentially harming themselves or killing other people. So this is obviously something that's getting a lot of attention in the media. But today we're going to really be talking about some of the research in back of understanding this behavior and understanding it in ways where we can make some intervention in that. So the topic of our show today is driving to distraction. Risks associated with high school students. In particular, we're going to talk about the high school students today who are texting while driving, because it does start at young ages, and we're going to be talking about how these behaviors get set very early on and then certainly will move into adulthood. So we have a national expert on this topic today, and I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Burgess-Dowdell. Dr. Burgess is a professor of nursing at Villanova University School of Nursing, and she has gotten funding to do this kind of research. And she's very unique in terms of healthcare professionals in general, as well as nurses who are doing research in this field that have to do with technology and the risks associated with overuse of this technology and how it hinders health, wellness, and well-being. So that is really the focus of our discussion. And Elizabeth is an expert in pediatric nursing, and she's been doing this work with young people, pediatric level children, and also with young adults. So we're delighted to have you, Elizabeth, as our expert today on this topic. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. A real pleasure.
Thank you. So let's start with distracted driving, and tell us how you got involved with this, because I think that alone is an interesting part of this journey. I mean, not a lot of people in healthcare have gotten involved with distracted driving. Tell us your story.
Well, distracted driving kind of comes under that umbrella of health risk behaviors. And as we look at risk-taking behaviors, especially in high school students, you have to start thinking about driving, because at age 16, they're allowed to get their permits. So I had done a survey and research project looking at high school students specifically with internet risk behaviors and then health risk behaviors, and driving comes under that. So an opportunity came up to do a research project looking at over 1,200 high school drivers who had license, and I had an opportunity to do that with Joseph DeVideo. And what we looked at was, of the 1,200, how many said they texted while driving? And over 56% of the sample said that they were texting and driving at the same time, which was very concerning. So went ahead and looked a little bit further into what else were they doing. So we looked at those 600 plus students who said they texted while they drove. And what we found were some very disturbing and concerning relationships with drinking alcohol while driving, drug use, specifically marijuana, and then electronic aggression, bullying. They had high rates of being a bully online. And that was kind of a wow, because risk behaviors do cluster together in an adolescent population, young adults also. And when we looked at the texting, they certainly clustered with other high-risk health behaviors.
That's very interesting. So texting may not be a behavior just isolated from everything else. In fact, you're finding just the opposite. It's associated with this whole idea of I'm invincible. I can drink, I can drive, I can text, I can whatever, bully other people, which is a very disturbing profile when you think about it. But just to give our audience an idea of what texting while driving looks like, I mean, do they have their device in their lap? I mean, how does it actually work in general?
Well, in general, cell phones tend to be one of two places, either in their lap or up next to the steering wheel. And it's important to remember we collected data from students in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania and Maryland, where it is illegal to text while you drive.
Okay.
So even though there are laws, they were still reporting that they were doing the behavior. So oftentimes you'll see somebody texting because they don't want to look down, because in driver ed, that's been identified as a problem. Looking down, when you take your eyes off the road, that's distraction, and that causes high risk outcomes, fatalities, car crashes, things of that. So oftentimes what teens will do, because they don't want to look down because they've learned not to look down, is they'll put the phone right next to the steering wheel. So they're not looking down, they're just looking over. Well, that doesn't always work well because you need two hands to sort of text. And the risk-taking behaviors of being invincible, absolutely, but also this is the age group that likes to take risk behaviors, and this is one of this population, this generation of adolescents and young adults, that time of life is a time when people do a lot of risk-taking. It often is their first time just drinking alcohol, it's their first time of smoking cigarettes, it's their first time using drugs or having sex or doing things of that nature, which is identified as risk-taking behaviors in health.
That's very interesting in terms of just the driver ed piece of this. To the best of your knowledge, tell us what you know about driver education. How is texting developed or addressed in driver education, or is it?
It depends upon the program. Most driver ed programs are now offered through public schools, and then it is oftentimes developed or also presented by whichever teacher has been assigned to do that particular course. There are, of course, standard policies and objectives that come out with driver's ed. But the focus of driver's ed is always going to be on safety, being a safe and responsible driver, not just for yourself, but to those others out on the road with you. And so that means they talk about don't eat, because distracted driving isn't just texting, it's also eating or putting on makeup or talking on the phone or playing the music too loud. They talk about those kinds of behaviors as being risk factors for negative outcomes, car crashes, fender benders, getting lost. Although many have GPSs now, that is coming down. But there is still the whole piece of the safety, the seat belts. It's gone beyond seat belts. And
Right. So it may be addressed in driver education, but it may not be emphasized enough in terms of the fact that many states are making this illegal. Do you know how many states have made it illegal?
I believe there are over half of our states, so I believe there's at least legislation in 24 or 25.
Right. But I wonder how enforceable it is, because it's hard to look into someone's window, with police going by. There's really very minimal surveillance, so to speak. So I wonder how many arrests there have been, or if that really makes much of a difference. I think it's good to have those laws on the books. They are a deterrent, but they may be more of a deterrent in theory than actual practice. Is that your experience?
Absolutely, and I think one of the most telling pieces that when we sat down to do the research, Joe DeVidio, who was a student at that time at Villanova, he said, well, nowhere on here did you ask if they text at a stop sign, because that's okay. And it's sort of like, no, texting while driving in a car that is moving or on is not okay, whether you're at a stop sign or not. So it really suggests also that it's not just adolescents and young adults who are doing this, adults are doing it also. And we really, especially as we look to high school students, many high school students don't have their own car. So they are in cars with friends, they're in cars with their parents, their siblings, other parents, friends' parents. They're carpooling here, they're carpooling there. And so we need to talk about how do we help them if they have to learn how to police their own behaviors. How do we help them also police other people's behaviors?
Right.
And look at what we are doing when we get behind the wheel
Right.
of this very large automobile that can do a lot of damage.
Well, I think that you're talking about role modeling. So it's the role modeling of parents, adults, or younger children looking at older children who have their license and adopting their same behaviors.
Very true.
Now, tell us about this profile. Let's go back to that. since your research, which this is the beauty of research, by the way, you can describe texting and you can talk about distracted driving in generalities, but what really makes this very interesting is that Elizabeth and her colleagues have actually measured this. So they really have an idea of how frequently this not only occurs, but this idea of clustered behaviors, the fact that you can start to see that this kind of distracted driving is really also sort of a door opener, so to speak, to other kinds of behaviors that you as parents or teachers or just members of the community should be quite concerned about. Drinking and driving, all those behaviors that are really not going to spell a good outcome, either for the individuals or for the people that they can potentially harm. So talk about that profile. I mean, when you started to look at the data and it started to sort of jump out at you that this was associated, what did you as researchers really conclude from all of that?
That texting while driving is not a single incident, that there are other factors and risk behaviors that go along with that. That is not just one. They are doing other behaviors, and it makes sense that if they're doing texting while they're driving, then looking at the alcohol consumption or drinking while driving. Mm-hmm. And that brought us then to, geez, oh Pete, these kids who are texting while driving are also having higher levels when compared to students who do not text and drive, higher levels of drinking alcohol while driving. Then that led us to looking at regular alcohol use, and they had higher levels of that also. And then the drug use, and specific to marijuana, had higher levels. So the students who were texting had higher risk levels than the students who were not. And that does show the clustering of the risk-taking behaviors: the texting, the drinking, the driving, the drug use. Are they doing others? Most likely. We didn't ask about some of those behaviors. We looked at these specific behaviors. Interestingly, they weren't smoking. They had a lower level of smoking cigarettes than the general 1200 did, which was interesting. But their alcohol was a real alarm because mm-hmm. we're looking at 16, 17, and mm-hmm. 18-year-olds.
Mm-hmm. So what would you think are the implications of that? If we start to see that these things are associated for various audiences, such as healthcare professionals, parents, teachers, what do you think we could do to really use that information and really apply it in some meaningful way?
I think as adults we need to realize that risk behaviors are not one at a time, that they are interjoined, they cluster together. If they're doing one thing, their chances are high school students are doing something else. And we really need to be open to that and acknowledge that one behavior may indicate that there are other risk behaviors. And so to address that, not only in our driver's ed, where we talk a lot about drinking and driving and don't do it, but now texting and driving. So when we're talking about alcohol prevention or smoking of cigarette prevention or drug prevention, we need to incorporate these other risk behaviors into that. And we need to have conversations with kids about those specific behaviors, understanding that you can't just talk about alcohol or you just can't talk about texting. It's got to be a good conversation that involves the different behaviors because they're doing all of the behaviors together.
Right, right. What occurs to me in listening to this conversation, Elizabeth, is that it would be interesting to have an intervention of some type where you have these conversations with the adolescents, high school students directly. I don't think you probably had that opportunity with your sample because she chose people that were in various states. They collect the data and they analyze the data. They don't necessarily get back and have conversations with those that participated in the study, although that would have been, of course, incredibly interesting. But that's not realistic or feasible. So how would you see taking this conversation directly to high school students?
I see it coming in two different avenues. One is through the programs that they already get. Every high school student who attends a public school in this country at some point has to take a health class. Mm-hmm. And part of that health class certainly is understanding and knowing their own health and identifying good health and health maintenance and health promotion. But also there's a big piece of that about risk taking and to incorporate all the different risk behaviors and to talk about them honestly and succinctly, and the fact that they go together, or the research supports that for many children they go together.
Right.
And then also looking at peer-to-peer, getting high school students to look and talk to each other, look at the behaviors of their friends, and then talk to their friends, especially if they feel uncomfortable. So if they're in a car and somebody is texting, or somebody is driving, or somebody is driving and drinking, and driving and drinking and texting, and they feel uncomfortable, we have to empower kids to feel that they can say something to a friend. I'll drive, or I don't feel comfortable with this, you're not okay to drive. Let me call my father, let me call my mother, let me call your mother or your father. Yes, there will be potential for bad outcomes from a parental reaction, but safety and life is important, and kids need to be empowered to understand that and to talk to each other, because as an adult, we're not doing the same behaviors. Maybe we did them 20, 30 more years ago, but that was a different time, and these kids are experiencing it in their own personal world, not how we had it 10, 20, 30 years ago. So it is important to really understand that they oftentimes are the best teachers to each other, especially if there has been a negative outcome or there was a risk that was taken and maybe there wasn't a bad outcome, but they got scared, or they got really worried, or they were really concerned. And so we take it to that level. So we bring in the traditional programs, but then we really encourage the peer-to-peer, also talking to adults. And as you age through adolescence, the number one person they turn to tends to be their friends as they get older, not their parents. That doesn't mean they don't always talk to their parents. It just means that oftentimes friends are the first ones they talk to before they get encouraged to go and talk to a parent. And that would be another piece, the friends of, wow, you did what? We need to talk to somebody about this. So a trusted adult moving forward who can offer positive reinforcement. That was great. That must have been really scary, but you did the right thing. Let's problem solve. Let's talk about, I'm not saying you'll never text again, but maybe you don't do it in the car. Just like you don't drink alcohol in the car, and to move that forward so that becomes a behavior at 16, at 17, that they are still doing at 20, at 25, at 30, so they are less likely to get into trouble behind the wheel of a car.
That's all very sound advice, and I think that it takes a lot of sophisticated intervention and discussion to really move it from just seeing these as isolated behaviors, like this particular person has an alcohol problem, or this particular kid or some of the friends, they're bullying. They are sort of known as the bullying crowd. That they are really doing behaviors together that really go beyond experimentation. I think that's a very key point as well. That everybody's experimenting at those years, but these are not the kids that are tending to experiment, once here, once there, although that's got its consequences as well. But this is really becoming a pattern of behavior.
Right.
And the question that we're talking about and attempting to crack the code on is, how can we change the course of that? How can we influence that whole complex of bad behaviors that are really going to hurt that individual, and as we've said, hurt other people as well? So who do you see having those conversations successfully? I mean, who's really good at this?
It's a great question. I would love to see parents feel comfortable having these conversations. I would love to see school nurses, if we can get more school nurses into schools, having those kinds of conversations. I'd also like to see the high school students having those conversations, maybe the older ones talking to the younger ones, or siblings, really role modeling good behavior, because kids know what's going on. And there is a climate of, well, don't tell, don't say anything, I'll get kicked off the team, or I can't be part of this club. There are academic consequences for when adults find out about risk-taking behavior, and yet the kids all know about it, especially when we're talking about isolated incidents or something that may or may not become chronic. So I'd love to see us with school nurses, with parents, and with adolescents themselves coming back, talking, and having really honest and frank conversations.
That's very good as well. I think what Elizabeth is really helping us to do is to move from reactionary to being proactive and looking at this from a prevention point of view, which again is hard to do, because sometimes people are oblivious that these things are even happening until there's some bad outcome. And then everybody gets whipped into a frenzy about how we should have known about this and we should have done something about it. We know in our country that there are a lot of things that are happening among our younger population that are very concerning, and yet there are many good things that are happening as well. So we want to keep everything in balance and really promote the good. But the good in this conversation is really how to know that there is a high incidence of this. This is not just isolated cases here and there. That's why research really helps you to think about this in a more proactive way, because it's not just one young person here and one young person there. Tell us again your findings. Just repeat your findings in terms of how many people answered this high school questionnaire for high school students that said they had this problem. I think it bears and is worthy of repetition.
The total sample was over 2,000. So of that total sample, 1,200 had a license and were driving.
Okay.
Of the 1,200, over 636 reported that they text and drive. And
Right.
then we looked at those students who said they text while driving. And we looked to see what else are they doing while driving. And they came out with drinking alcohol while driving, substance use, drugs, and then also the electronic aggression and the bullying, which does tend to make sense if they are constantly on that text, on that cell phone, texting, they're going to have an electronic savvy. And we did not ask if it was creating the electronic aggression or reading it or forwarding or sending. So there's more information that needs to be done with that. But looking at the risk of texting and driving, they tend to also drink alcohol while they're driving. They're drinking alcohol. They're using drugs or experimenting
Right.
with drugs.
Right. What we don't know is of that sample of only 2,000 high school students, as a drop in the bucket to all the high school students that are in the country, that 600 said that they are texting while driving along with other behaviors. We don't know how many of those 600 have already had accidents or have hurt other people. We can only assume that of that 600, some percentage, maybe it was 10%, that would be 60. Maybe it was 5%, that would be 30. Whatever the number is, it has to be someone. Somebody got hurt somewhere along the line, I think, in those 600. We can make that assumption without really knowing for sure. Mm-hmm. So this is really happening a lot more than we even know. We only hear in the news about those worst case scenarios where someone got killed or killed someone else. That is the worst outcome. Yeah. But there are other outcomes that are also extremely serious that really are before one has death in the equation. And I think that we have to listen up to what you're telling us, because there are many opportunities where this could be discussed. But who's going to take the lead on this? It's not going to be the kids that are doing this. It's going to be those that are surrounding them. And I loved your point about peers and peer intervention. But I also wonder, isn't that going to be hard for peers to do? Tell us about some of the challenges that they face.
Well, I think peers face the biggest challenge of they want to be liked. And who doesn't want to be liked?
Right.
I mean, we all want to be liked. That's the nature, certainly, of being an adolescent, but also being a human being. We all want to be liked. And so having to say something that might be slightly controversial or sound like it's, oh, you're so prudish or you're being uptight, that often comes with the drama of adolescence. And so empowering students to be able to kind of move past or move through some of that. I mean, motor vehicle accidents in this country are the #1 cause of death and disability for high school students, for adolescents. And they are occurring every day. Every second or every minute, there is a number of kids who are being injured and disabled and killed. And so it is a very real outcome. And what we have to talk about with students is really looking at their own behaviors and learning to manage their own behaviors, and then encouraging them to speak up. You can't control somebody else, but perhaps if you say, I don't feel comfortable doing that, or hey, Mom, get off the phone, or hey, I have to put my cell phone in the glove compartment. Why aren't you doing that, Dad? Helping them start to feel comfortable saying things of that nature. We all taught them you don't on a stove that's lit, you don't put your hand on top of it. They learned danger. They learned how to be safe in the home, well, ideally in the home. We need to teach them how to be safe in their cars or in our cars because, again, not many children are owning cars. They are using a family car or someone else's.
Right. I think that that's great advice. I can also just hear the intimidation that must go on when somebody is trying to confront another peer who is very confident that they know what they're doing by texting, feel very confident that they can drink and drive, and can be very bullying in their own way to push this kind of feedback away. And I think it's hugely challenging to get young people to speak in that way to their peers. They would seem to me they would either avoid them, which may be good as one defense mechanism, or if they do try to confront them, then they feel like they've been diminished through the experience. I guess what we really need to do is we need to hear some really good news stories, examples of young people that have done that have taken that risk, and have really felt good about it, felt that they made a difference.
Well, also looking at parents and really reinforcing to parents. If your kid calls you at 10 o'clock at night or 2 o'clock in the morning and says, Tommy's been drinking and I don't want to get in the car, there's no reaction other than, I am on my way. I'll be there.
Right.
And understanding that the, oh my gosh, has to be contained. There's no reaction. There's no punitive reaction, especially if you pick up your child and the child obviously has been drinking or smells of something else. That's a conversation to be held at a later date. They have to feel safe that they can reach out if they truly don't feel comfortable and they're intimidated, which is a great word, intimidated, then we have to provide them with a safe area where they know that they can call a trusted adult, an older sibling, an aunt, an uncle, someone can come out and get them, especially if a motor vehicle is involved. I think you see adolescents talking more freely and more succinctly to dear friends or long-term friends who they've known since childhood. There is an ease there. There is a comfort level there. But we also have to be able to tell kids that, it's okay if you are getting into a situation and you don't want to be there. It's okay to say either one, I don't want to be here, or, create the I've got a stomach ache and I've got to go home. There are mechanisms that we can teach to children and we can encourage children, but it's the reaction. Many won't do it because they're embarrassed, but they're also scared of what's going to happen when I tell mom that Tommy was driving and we were weaving all over and then got pulled over, and now she's going to be furious with me. We all react. We all react to bad things, but we really have to remember who's the priority here. Is it our reaction to having to get out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and go over to so-and-so's house? Or is it that child needs to be, we need to role model positive behavior for that child, to put that child back into a safe arena and to reinforce that was a good decision. That was a great, great decision. Well done. Well done.
That is fantastic advice. Dr. Dodell has really, really helped us with this, because part of our program is to help you gain better health, wellness, and disease prevention, in this case, accident prevention. But it really has to do with confidence that you have, the confidence that you build up, that you can have these conversations, that these conversations are as critical as when you were taking care of your child, in the case of a parent, when they were tiny and they needed to be fed or they needed to be protected in some other way. It is definitely more challenging to have these conversations now that they're older, and they can push back and they can say, oh, that's ridiculous, oh mom, I don't really want to hear it. They can walk out of the room, but the fact that you have the confidence, you know from this program that you have every right to do this. This is your parental responsibility, or teachers or counselors, nurses in the school setting in particular, as we've already heard. You have the responsibility for bringing up these conversations, and this should make you feel good that you have made a difference, because you are the ultimate teacher, the ultimate trainer, and that what you do, your role modeling and the words that you speak and how you approach this And Elizabeth has given you some great key points and some great lines that you can use in those conversations. That is really what's going to make a difference. And your confidence level is definitely going to save lives. So thank you so much for listening to this program today. We have reviewed all the risks associated with distracted driving, and we've talked about the tips, the health consequences, and we hope that this will give you the armamentarium that you need to fight this problem in our society. Thank you so much for being with us. Have a wonderful day. I hope you enjoyed our conversation today and that the information will help you in meeting your health goals. Catch this program and other conversations on the website, drnancyrn.com. Or you can write to me as well. I welcome your comments and feedback. Thank you for listening and join us again. And remember, with health, all things are possible.